After covering everything about the physical aspect of the Canon EOS R6 in part 1, this part 2 will be all about the menus. If you're a complete beginner or just unpacked your Canon R6, I recommend you pause this video, open up a new tab and go watch that before coming back to this video. If you already did that, thank you very much. Or if you are just curious about the menus, then you are definitely in the right place. In this video, I will go over everything you need to know as a beginner from a menu and menu function settings. I will also share some of my settings I use as a professional videographer and photographer. Before we start with the recording quality, we're actually going to make one other change first. Let's say you are recording or taking photos of something you can't experience again, like a wedding or a birthday, or in my case, anytime I do a professional assignment, I always have my camera set to save to both cards at the same time. That goes for both video and photography. This way we always have a backup if one card would fail. I mean, it's very rare that the card will fail, and if you buy quality cards it's even less of a chance, but it could happen. Now I don't see any reason when we have a camera like the Canon EOS R6 with dual slots why we would ever risk that happening. So please set your camera when doing important stuff to record to two cards at the same time. So if you first go into the settings menu, and on the first tab we can go into recording functions, and here we're going to go to record separately for photography. Note that you need both card slots occupied for this option to be available. Then when we go back to image quality, suddenly we have the option to save two different photography settings to our two memory cards. So for example, you can pick RAW on your main card and you can pick large JPEG on your second card. Next we gonna skip tab 2, it's not much we need to change there, but on top of tab 3 we have white balance. Either we have auto white balance or color temperature. I would say it's the two most common I use, and color temperature you just set different Kelvins depending on what type of light you're using. And on auto white balance I would recommend to change to auto white balance white priority. It will just look better in most circumstances. Further down we have picture style, and if we're shooting RAW it doesn't matter, but if we're doing dual card with large JPEG, then picture style will influence your JPEG style. Or if you're not shooting RAW at all and only shoot JPEG, then picture style matters. I usually set mine to neutral because I use it as a backup, so I would want it to look as close to RAW as possible. If you want your photos to look the best straight out of the camera, pick the standard profile, but I'm gonna leave mine to neutral. Color space should be sRGB. It's the standard for internet, so just leave it like that. Custom white balance I use if I'm doing sort of controlled environments, studio shooting, or when doing professional video work. But for most beginner and most everyday applications, auto white balance with white priority will be the best. We're going to skip tab 4 and tab 5. I leave those two standard settings. But on tab 6 we have something really important, and that is shutter mode. In most cases I never take my Canon R6 off the electronic shutter. I mean, it's a mirrorless. But the electronic shutter has its limitation, and that comes when we want to do long exposures, longer than half a second. That's the limitation of the electronic shutter. We need to put the camera in a different shutter mode. And I would say mechanical shutter is where I would go. We have a hybrid mode as well, but I usually switch between the mirrorless electronic shutter or the mechanical shutter depending on user cases. But most of the times, probably 99% of the time, I leave my Canon R6 in the electronic shutter mode. Tab 7 and 8 I would leave in standard settings, but on tab 9 we actually need to stop for a minute. Movie recording quality will affect the quality of the video when you press the record button while in a photo mode. I'll say that again, in a photo mode. So if you flip the dial into dedicated video mode, you get different video settings. With that out of the way, we can just pick the recording quality that we want. I'm gonna choose 4K 25 frames per second IPB. And the reason I have these settings is because I have my camera set to PAL. More on that later. If you're using an external microphone, and you should if you want decent audio quality, then switch sound recording to manual. And that way we can also alternate the recording levels. I will leave wind filter and alternator to the default settings. Here is an important crossroad. Either we use the camera as standard as possible, sort of a vacation point and click type of style, or we learn to use it like a professional from start. I'm specifically speaking about the function that's called 2 buttons back button autofocus, and even if it's the 4th video I mentioned this, it's still a handful to say. I will link a video to set that up after this video, so you don't have to pause and go find that. You can just continue watching that after this video. Instead, I will show you how to sort of set up the autofocus, let's call it the standard way, so you can start to use your Canon R6 right away. On AF operations, we're going to switch from one-shot AF to servo AF. This will make it much easier to track moving subjects. Under AF method, we are going to switch to the amazing dual pixel autofocus, which is eye tracking. Subject to detect can be either people, animals, vehicles, or you can disable it. If you disable it, it will not prioritize anything specific, but I always pick the thing I'm actually gonna photograph. Subject to detect for people or animals, we also want eye detection enabled. Continuous autofocus should be disabled. You don't want that continuously hunting for focus, it will drain your batteries, it's just a pain. I'm gonna leave movie server AF enabled, that works when we do video. On tab 2, we have something called MF peaking settings. This is very helpful if you are doing manual focus, specifically doing video manual focus, and you want to sort of display in a specific color. I usually pick red. That way you sort of paint your viewfinder red what's in focus. It's super helpful if you're doing manual video work with your Canon R6. The rest I'm gonna leave as it is. Tab 3 is a little tricky to sort of easily explain what the different cases does. I often use case 1 or 3, but basically it will alternate how sticky the autofocus is. So if you feel that you're sort of losing autofocus when tracking fast moving object through obstacles, then try out different cases. I leave mine on case 1 most of the time. We can also change tracking sensitivity and the acceleration of the tracking. There's also an auto mode that will try to do the best of most type of scenarios, but I would recommend 1 or 3. Tab 4 is a lot of advanced settings. I don't gonna go into that in this tutorial, as well as tab 5. Most of the menu options inside the play menu I wouldn't use inside the camera. I would prefer just to export the images into my computer and do settings like that there. There's one exception. On tab 4 on the slideshow, also, if you combine it with an HDMI cable, you can sort of show your images directly. If you, let's say you have done a birthday photography for your family and want to show your family the pictures you took, you can do a slideshow, plug in your HDMI and just show them on an external TV, for example. It can also be very helpful with the clients, but then maybe if you do professional work, you will have external monitors or maybe even wireless solutions. So from a beginner standpoint, slideshow, HDMI cable, and you're good to go. I think the rest of the play menu, we're just gonna leave that. This is a very good but situational menu. It's a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth menu, and it lets you connect your camera to a Wi-Fi so other devices can find your camera, like your smartphone. I often use the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connection with the Canon app, so I think you should download that as well. The Canon app is actually really good. I use it very often as a solo shooter if I, for example, need to start and stop a video of myself, or when I take a thumbnail for YouTube as example, then I use the remote app to sort of trigger the camera. I'm actually going to make a separate video just for the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth settings, the wireless settings of the Canon R6, because I think it deserves that. There are some quirks, but there are also some pros and cons that I think we need to know. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on that. We have already covered recording, so I will briefly mention that file numbering and name can be really important if you like to name your files. I'll leave mine to default. Format cards is something I think you should do before every new shoot. Make sure you have the right date and time so you have proper metadata on your files. Language should be the first thing we set so you can use your camera in different languages. Video systems we have covered. You can pick between PAL and NTSC. And I mean, US, Japan, Canada still uses NTSC. More or less the rest of us will use PAL. Beep, nobody wants beep, disable that. Headphone volume, obviously something that only transfers to if you're using headphones, which we often use when we are recording video. Leave Viewfinder off disabled, which actually means that the Viewfinder is on if you do any external recording. Otherwise, I think you can have the Viewfinder off if you like. Lastly, we have Eco Mode. It's the old infamous overheating protection menu that Canon renamed to the Eco Mode. Tab 3 is important, Viewfinder settings. Here we can alternate between screen or Viewfinder, or even better, the two auto modes. What's really cool is that you have a sensor at the Viewfinder, and that serves a really good purpose. Turning off the screen will help save batteries, but it will also prevent switching settings with your face when you raise your camera, and that's kind of embarrassing, so we don't want that. Screen brightness. If you shoot outside and have trouble seeing your screen, you might need to increase the brightness. I would also recommend to keep it as low as possible as it saves battery, so I only increase mine if the circumstances dictates it. Otherwise, I keep it as low as possible to save battery. On tab 4 we have an important settings, especially if you're using an external recorder like the Ninja 5. I recommend keeping it at auto, so if you switch resolution on your camera, you switch the output. Sensor cleaning is one of these things that you might forget is in the menu, but it's good to do now and then to shake off any dust that has collected on your sensor. Custom shooting mode is actually pretty cool and something I wish I used sooner when I picked up the Canon R6. Basically what you can do is all the current settings within your camera you can save to a custom shooting mode. All the settings we currently have, if you save that for example to C1, when you flip the dial to C1 on your camera, you have activated all those settings. If you need to clear a setting, just hit clear settings, then just go to that custom shooting menu you want to delete and clear it. You could also save over a current setting. Copyright information is really helpful, especially if you're posting on social or if you do any professional work. You need to protect those photos of yours and ensure you input proper copyright information. Firmware version is one of those things that we just need to check now and then. I can't stress enough how important I think it is to run the latest firmware. Not only will it contain fixes to bugs and known issues, it can also contain really good new features and functions. Check Canon site for your region and just compare the latest firmware to what you have in your camera. If the number in your camera is lower than the latest firmware on the Canon site, it's time to update. And as I stated in part 1, updating your firmware should be the very first thing you do after fully charging your battery. So just make sure you keep your firmware updated. Under custom function menu, there are a lot of sort of tweaks that I would say don't belong in a beginner guide, so I'm going to leave that for a future video. Except exposure and ISO. I believe it's, for at least for my purpose, 1/3 of a stop rather than 1/2 of a stop or a full stop of ISO. It's much better. Especially as the Canon R6 is really good handling ISO for low light situations. I think it's better to leave the camera the possibility to go in 1/3 of a stop. Custom buttons on tab 3 are an amazing function for the Canon R6. I have previously linked, and I'm gonna link after this video, the 2-button back button autofocus, which uses custom buttons. But if you feel that you have a feature inside the camera that you only can access through a menu, but you can program to a button, I would say it's time, so you have sort of graduated from beginner to intermediate, the next step in the evolution of using your camera, and then by all means just reprogram your buttons. This last one is a really nice feature as well, and the Canon R6 gives you the possibility to build your own custom menus. This is really helpful if you have a few settings that you access regularly. That way you can program them into a menu. So I'm gonna do custom white balance just to show you. So we registered this to our custom menu on tab 2, and here you can see that you have that setting available. That way you can sort of build custom menus with all the favorite settings that you use on a regular basis. And if you take that one step further, then you'd program a custom button with your custom menu. So that way, with just a click of a button, you can access your custom menu and all your favorite settings. I would love to hear what you think about this series so far. Please give me a comment below and tell me what you liked the most and what you would like to see in a future video in this series. I really hope you got something out of this video. I know I did making it. And if you liked it, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. It would mean the world. That's gonna be it for me. Until next one, bye bye, hej då.